Welcome back to the Happy Scrappy Quilt Along. We are on week 6, so we are at the final tail end of this quilt along, and by now we've got our quilt pieced together and basted. So this week we are quilting, and I'm going to be doing that on my domestic machine. And if you don't want to do that, then skip this video and send it off to a quilter to be professionally quilted. Either way is a perfectly valid option. If you want to discover and learn more about quilting on your home machine, then stay tuned, because I'm going to talk about the reason why I love it and the pros and cons. And next week we will be binding the quilt, so that's always a fun one. And then we're done, and we will have a completed quilt, and super fun, super easy. This is entry-level, beginner-friendly quilt. So stay tuned, and let's get into it. Now, before we actually dive into quilting on quilting the quilt, I actually want to talk about the machine. So there are a lot of machines out there, and people have from a basic entry-level machine all the way to the fanciest machines with all the bells and whistles. I have had all of the machines. And so I'll talk about that. I've had the very basic entry level, and anyone who has that knows you're going to have a lot of problems with it, and this might not be the best way to use that machine. But let me just hold that thought and circle back to that in a little bit, because you can do home quilting on a basic entry-level machine. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's going to be more challenging. Obviously, these machines are not, they don't like a lot of bulky fabric, and so you've just got to handle it with a little bit of kid gloves, but you can do it. Now, I've also had the machine on the other end with all the bells and whistles that did embroidery. It had 1,000+ million stitch options and computerized, and that gave me problems too. That was not a machine specifically for quilting. I loved using that machine for sewing clothing. I used to sew my children's clothing when they were little. Well, not my children's, my daughter's clothing when they were little, and specifically one daughter who loved my handmade clothes. My other daughter didn't. So my one child's clothing I used to sew when she was little, and I loved it. I loved the buttonhole stitch and the zigzag and all the stitches. I didn't really use any of the fancy embellishment stitches or anything like that, but it had some good stitch options that are needed for sewing clothing. And so I don't want to completely put down the high-end machine. And I did use it for embroidery. I did do that a lot, and I used to sell products with embroidery on them, and that was fun. But if I haven't mentioned already, I have an ADD brain, and so I burned out on that, and eventually landed on quilting, and I'm stuck on quilting, and it's not going anywhere. So I didn't need that machine. I actually recently gave that one away, and so I hope that whoever received it is just enjoying it as much as I did, because it was a good machine. Just wasn't what I needed now. So now I have 3 machines, and the only reason I have 2 for quilting. I have 2 Jukies. Jukies are my absolute favorite. They are for quilting. They only have a straight stitch. So you've got your straight stitch, and then you can reverse and, you know, and do free motion quilting, but you're not going to have a zigzag. You're not going to have a buttonhole. It's just a straight stitch. So what it does very well. These machines are heavy duty. They're metal, like they feel like the vintage sewing machines, just that heavy duty feeling, and metal gears, and they are built to last, and they are built to work hard. One of the first things I notice is when I have any bulk in a quilt, with my Juki, it just goes right over any bulk like butter. Like it's not a problem. Every other machine I had, from my fancy one to my basic one, would get jammed up on any bulky areas, and then the threads would get, they would stitch too much and then start getting loopy in the background, and it was just a mess trying to figure that out. So I love how it can handle seams that, whether we try to reduce bulk a lot when quilting, but sometimes you are going to get a little bulky area, and it doesn't phase my Jukies. The reason why I have two is because I'm quilting almost every day, and so I need to get my machines serviced a lot. Because I'm running a business, and this is not just a little hobby, and so it's just every day I am sewing and just using my machines to the max. And so I get them serviced at least once a year. I want to say probably every 8 months or so. And so when I send one in, I cannot wait for 2 or 3 weeks to get that back. And so it's simply a practical business reason why I have two machines. And so while one is off being serviced, I'm using the other one. And then when that one's off being serviced, I switch to the other one. I do have two separate Jukies as far as their models. I have the entry-level one, which is I'm using that right now. It's the TL2000 QI. And this one is, I think this is the one that doesn't have a stitch regulator at all. So I will be using that today, and you'll see it's just fine. But you do have to be more careful in free motion quilting with no stitch regulator, because the stitches can get too compact, too close together. And so you just have to really have a feel, be more conscious of what you're doing and have a feel for what you're doing. The other one, and I could be wrong. If I'm wrong on this, then correct me in the comments, because it's been a while since I bought these. The other one is the 2010 Q machine, and this one I think is the one that does have the stitch regulator. And I do notice a difference. If I were to recommend a machine, I would probably recommend, it's not that much more expensive, I would probably recommend the 2010 Q because of the stitch regulator. It just kind of takes the burden of figuring of just being really hyper aware when you're quilting of your stitch length. It takes that off, and so it's just an easier experience when you're quilting. But the 2000 QI, honestly, I'm using it. I've been using it for months, and it's perfectly fine. It just takes a little bit more getting used to. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the designs that you can do when you're quilting at home. I stick to 3 or 4 very basic designs. I don't want to get fancy on my home machine. It's probably going to look like a big mess if I do that. It's better to really practice and get a couple designs down and master those and feel confident with those. And if you want to get fancy, send it off to a quilter. The long arm machines can do amazing motifs and designs that really would be difficult to replicate on a home machine. It will never, the home machine quilting will never look as nice and crisp and meticulously, done as a professional long arm machine, which is computerized, so it's perfect. So that's my advice there. Now, the ones that I do are straight line stitching, whether it's straight parallel lines or whether I follow a seam vertical and follow the seams horizontal. And this you can do on your very entry level machine and on your expensive bells and whistles machine. And this is the one that I would recommend doing on those machines. I honestly wouldn't recommend anything with curves. I have tried quilting curves on my other machines, and so this is my experience, and some of you may just be pros at this, so take this for what it's worth. My experience is that my machines couldn't handle the curves. I would get a lot of pulling in the bobbin. The tension just was never right. I spent more time trying to figure out the tension when I was quilting than actually quilting. So it was just a constant battle to figure out the tension and the curves. And then I got my Jukies, and all of that was gone. It was easy. I've never had a problem. Once I wouldn't even know how to adjust the tension on my Juki at this point because I haven't had to. So I just haven't had any of that problem. And so for me, I will only do my quilting on my Juki. I've just had no issues with maintenance, and except for the regular maintenance. So if I take my machine in at least once a year, it's probably once a year. that I take it in. If I keep it on a regular maintenance schedule, just like my car, you know, just getting it just cleaned out really good, I can clean out my machine, but I still take it for a professional to calibrate it and clean it and oil it and do all the things so it comes back like brand spanking new and perfect, ready to go. If I do that, I have no problems. So it is my most hassle-free machine, and this is not a paid sponsorship. I bought my own machines with my own money, but I love it so much. So if I were going to recommend it, I would recommend that to anyone else. Back to the straight line quilting. It is the easiest thing to do as far as it's just a straight line. And yet, for me, it could be the most difficult. It probably is the most difficult fussy design of the few designs that I like to do. And the reason being, and I mentioned this when I talked about doing your quilt sandwich and leaving room around the edges for when your fabric kind of warps over to one side or the other when you're quilting. This is why. So the only time I have fabric veering off into one direction or leaning over into another direction and kind of warping the whole shape of the quilt is when I'm straight line quilting. I use my, oh gosh, what's it called? My little foot, my walking foot, that just left my brain. I use my walking foot, I go nice and slow, I do all the things, and even with all that, I will still get some pull in one direction or another. And so when you are straight line quilting, make sure that you go in one direction and then stitch in the opposite direction to kind of keep pulling it back and forth. So if you stitch all like from left to right across your whole quilt, your quilt will go very much over to the right. So that's something to keep in mind. You just got to be very careful and slow and take it easy with straight line quilting. As easy as that sounds, and you just want to race right through it, don't do it. So the other quilting design that is a favorite of mine is the petal. What do I call it? It's just a petal design. And I do have a YouTube video up, and I will link it below and maybe up here if I can figure that out. I have a petal design on a YouTube video where I walk you through how I do that. And that's a really easy one. It does take time, but it's super easy. So I love to do that one when the quilt kind of calls for it. And then probably the one I go to the most is just a meandering stitch. And I'm going to do that today and show you how I do that. It is, I would say, for a machine that can handle curves, it is the most beginner-friendly design. It's very hard to mess this up. And you don't need any special tools or gadgets or rulers or anything like that. So that's what I'm going to start into, and hopefully I answered questions about machines and quilting designs that are entry level for your home machine. If you have any other questions, if I missed anything or got anything wrong, which I might have, just put it in the comments and let's talk about it. So I'm going to switch my camera view so that you can see what I'm doing, and let's start some free motion quilting. Okay, to get started, I did want to show this is what the walking foot looks like. And it goes over this shaft right here, and then this part goes right over this little knob thingy right here. So I'm not going to use that today, but I did just want to give you a look at that. So I've got my regular foot in, and I'm just going to use this little tool to replace it with my free motion foot. So I'll just get that back in there. And then the other thing that I want to do is I want to put my stitch length on my machine, and you can't see that, but I'm going to put my stitch length to 0. And then I'm going to drop, let's see if I can move my camera. I'm going to drop my presser foot right here, this little knob. What it does is it drops, not my presser foot, my feed dog. It drops the feed dog down. So if I have it up, then this feed dog is going to help from this side, help pull the bottom fabric through at the same time that the top fabric is going through. And we don't want that because we want to have the freedom to not go in a straight line. And so I'm going to drop it down, and this disables it. And that way we can start quilting. So I like to start my meandering stitch in the middle of one side of my quilt. And let me see, let me get this. And it doesn't have to be exact, but I do like to start it at the center and then kind of work in quadrants in my quilt. So that's what we're going to start doing. And I'm going to actually pause and find my quilting gloves. Okay, I've got my quilting gloves, and I probably need to order myself some new ones because these are looking worse for the wear. But these gloves create a friction. They've got a little bit of a rubber tip on the fingers, and they create just enough friction to where you can control the fabric so much better. So like I was saying, I do like to start, in the center of one side and then work in quadrants. And it's not a perfect thing for sure, but it's a general rule. You don't have to be perfect about it. You don't have to be perfect about any of this. So meandering stitch. Okay, so I lowered my feed dog. I put my stitch regulator, my stitch length to 0. And the last thing I need to do is make sure on the Juki there's this little knob here, and it's going to have a line that you're going to kind of want it to be at the top. And what that does is it just elevates the foot. I don't know what it's called. I'm so bad with technical terms, but it reduces the pressure that the presser foot is putting down on the fabric. So I'm just going to start at one side. I'm going to take out this safety pin, and I have my little pouch here, and I just like to have it right to the side so I can take out my pins as I go and put them in there. So for a meandering stitch, you're just going to do little curves around and then curve over on itself, and just whatever you feel comfortable with, honestly. I suggest getting a little scrap of fabric and playing with it, but even if you try to keep it really curvy, and once in a while I'll pause, and when I start up again I get a little straight edge, a little square edge, and it just doesn't show unless you've got a fabric that is really showing everything, but here it doesn't show. And I'm actually looking at my thread, and I've got white thread, and I'm just trying to decide if I want to actually stop what I'm doing right now and change out my thread. So I'm going to pause and see what other thread colors I have and make a decision. Okay, so I actually did change my mind, and I put in a yellow thread, and I'm just hoping I have enough. If I don't, then we'll have to figure that out. So I'm still using white thread in my bobbin, and again, the tension on this machine is so good, I don't think that will even be an issue. So here we go. I'm just going to start out, and then once I start, let me find my scissors, I'm going to have my needles down, and I'm going to have this loose thread that I just kind of want to get out and trim off. That's from my start. And then I'm just going to start the meandering design, and my meandering design will look different from yours. That's okay. All right, so that's really what it is. You're just kind of doing little loopy shapes, and you can kind of loop them back in on itself to come back. I like to do a chunk of the edge before working my way inwards. So that's what I'm doing. I'll do just a little bit more, and then I'll start working my way towards the center. So I did say that this machine has no problem with any bulk, but I have found, as you might have just seen, caught that, is that when I'm doing free motion quilting, it does struggle with the points with any bulk. And so I have to slow down and just assist it, just help it through just a little bit. So that is the exception to what I said before. So here we go. And the one thing that I would say is to be very aware of the size of your, I don't want to say loops, but your curves. You can go really small and tight or keep them really large and open. These are kind of medium size, but whatever you choose, whatever you find yourself doing, just try to stay very consistent with that. Now, in these little curves that we're making, some people like to go, and I've done this before, and it's a fun option, is to go in and maybe sew a little heart in your loop or a star. So as you get used to this design, you can definitely add little things like that. If you're doing like a Valentine's quilt, you can throw in some little hearts, and they're really easy to do. So you're already making curves. You might as well throw some in if that's kind of the theme of your quilt. The other thing that I will say is a lot of quilters like to roll up their sides as they go, and I didn't do that. And I do sometimes take the time to do that, and here I just didn't. But just know that's an option. If you're really limited on throat space, which is now that we have the camera up, it's this area right in here. When you're limited on throat space, it makes a lot of sense to roll up this side. I just didn't even think about it, but it's something that you can do. All right, I just ran out of bobbin. So I'm going to actually bring the camera close so that you can see exactly what this looks like so far. Okay, so here is a closer view, and here is contrasting colors so you can see the threads better. And it just gives it, as you go back, you can see it just gives it a nice texture without an obvious design to it. So I really like how it looks, and I think it goes with just about any quilt. Get closer, and there's that yellow thread. The yellow thread isn't going to be obvious on similar colors like the red, but you will see it more on the blue. And even then, it's not really obvious as you get farther away, if you see that. But as you get closer, a contrasting thread is a kind of a fun thing. But don't worry if you don't have any contrasting thread. You can just use white and it will pretty much be the same effect as you're farther away, you won't really notice what color of thread is being used. All right, I am going to switch out the bobbin thread and then I will speed this up and continue quilting. Before I speed this up, I am going to get this started right here. So I will show you, well, it depends. You can do it the lazy way, and I do that a lot, and just get started, or you can pull up, let me get my seam ripper. You can pull this up and then pull up this thread from the back, your bobbin thread. So those are both up at the top. That way you don't have a bobbin thread on the back that needs to be clipped. You don't have any loose threads to clip there. And then put my needle down right in line with where I was stitching. Now I am going to lift up my presser foot and I'm going to hold on to that thread. I'm going to snip off the other ones actually. There we go. So I don't mistake them for each other. I'm going to pull up that thread, lift up my needle, and that's going to pull up the bobbin thread ideally. Let's see. Is it doing it? It's not wanting to pull up because I've made a mess. All right, let's try that again. Pull up that bobbin thread. Oh, it doesn't want to come up. Let's see. There we go. Pull up the bobbin thread. This is real life, guys. This is real. And if I can grab it, now my bobbin thread is through the top. And that's what I want. I want it through the top. And now I'm just going to start my stitching. I'm going to go back 1 or 2 stitches and forward. See, it's very hard to do this without the quilting gloves to move the fabric around. So let me just get a little bit going. Okay. So now I've got the bobbin thread and the top thread up here, and I'm just going to snip them both. And that way I don't have anything on the bottom. I don't have any bobbin thread or any top thread knotted down there. So that's the idea. I kind of made a debacle of that one, but that's the idea, is pull that bobbin thread up and do your stitches and then just snip it off on the top side. There are definitely more complicated ways to do it, but that's the gist of the very basics of keeping the back side really clean. So now I'm going to keep on going and I will be speeding this part up for you. I ran out of bobbin again, so I will be replacing that. And one trick for bobbin thread is I like to wind up like 5 or 6 bobbins of thread before I even start, so that I don't have to be stopping and winding up bobbin throughout this process, because I go through quite a few spools of bobbin. So let's just take a look. This is what it's looking like. And you'll see I started over here at the middle and I worked my way up to the center and then out right here to the side. And now I'm going to go back and fill in this corner, and then I'll work on the next quadrant. However, when I get to what I think is the center, and honestly I might be a little off center and that's no big deal, but when I get to the center, I like to kind of work my way up and in and down and leave it uneven so that it looks really natural, so I don't have like a hard line where I stopped, because I think that would be noticeable when I go back and do the other quadrant. So I kind of overlap and then leave a gap down here and then overlap, and then when I come back in from this side, it will all just kind of naturally fill in. But look at that just gorgeous texture that this design leaves. And you can do it really super tight and small little compact design, and it will even be more texture, so it's just whatever you want. Like I said, this is more of a medium texture. So that's the idea. I will replace my bobbin and then come back and again speed this up, and let's finish up this quilt. this wraps up week 6 of our Happy Scrappy Quilt Along. I am so excited. We now have a quilted quilt, and all we have left to do is bind our quilt. So it's almost there. It's coming together, and honestly, for me at least, binding is my favorite part. So I'm super excited about just finishing it off with some fun binding. And I'm actually curious to know, what's your favorite part of the process of making a quilt, and what's your dreaded step? We all have a part that we're like, oh, I just got to power through this one. But for me, I love these final steps. They are just so satisfying, and it's just fun to see it all come together. The minute that I trim off the excess batting and fabric, I just feel so excited. Like, it's almost done, and I almost have a complete quilt. So be sure to join me next week as we bind. And if you, again, need the schedule, it's going to be in the description below for the entire Quilt Along. There are 7 weeks of the Quilt Along. And even if you find this, years from now, you can still follow along. The videos will be here from each week, so you can follow along with us. The pattern, again, is a free download on my website, and the link is below. And that's it. I hope you have a blessed day, and thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.